Welcome to the True North podcast, where two practicing light workers get together. You don't have a beverage. Okay, that's better. Where two practicing light workers get together every week to continue an ongoing conversation of wellness and healing for body and mind so that you can live as your true self and follow your true north. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Abby. And there's your beverage.
There's my beverage. There's my dog. I can't show you because it will spill, but it's like this. It's like a dog, and the opening is the mouth.
Oh,
it's
that's
cute.
Fun.
I'll show you after I finish it. You are not in your normal. You don't have your normal background.
Yes, I am in some new digs today. I'm in a place of power right near the mountains. Yeah, I'm in Denver today.
With your power animal right behind you?
With my power animal conveniently over my right shoulder.
Like right here. And my power animal is all of my pop figures.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of funny. It's like he's sitting on my shoulder.
It is.
It's interesting. It's my right side. Okay.
Let's dig into that for the whole episode.
Okay. Yes. No, I'm in Denver. As I mentioned in our last episode, in our gratitude piece, I lost my grandmother. So I am traveled to Nebraska for a few days to do the funeral arrangements. And then now I'm out in Denver. We had already had a trip planned, so we just kind of merged the two. So here we are.
What a time to go to the mountains, though. Like that's where you find your peace and your solace and your connection. And like, it just, I love when things like that just kind of come together.
I know. I agree. It's definitely.
Do you have
right now.
anything that you wanted to bring to this?
Well, we never did talk about the reflection piece or really break down like the New Year's episode that I was talking about, which sort of rolls in nicely considering my grandma's funeral was just this week. Because when I was kind of, when plans got changed, I flew back to Nebraska very last minute to say goodbye to my grandmother, because at that point we had put her on hospice care. And she's a very important person in my life. And so that sort of changed our recording schedule at that point. And you had sort of put out the feelers to have people just kind of record just something briefly on their reflection of 2020. And I thought, this is a good time, as I'm flying back to say goodbye to her. I had some quiet time on the airplane, and I just thought, let me kind of think about this year. So I wrote something up a little bit, and then I was actually sitting in the hospital in the middle of the night watching her sleep, and just decided to go ahead and send you a recording. And so that's sort of where it started. But it just really got me thinking, like, in a very unique way, 2020, while it gave us all a lot of loss for many reasons, I do think that it was very much a connector. Like, it brought us together because of those things. And, I think you mentioned this, was it on our call? You mentioned our episode, I don't remember, but how, like, everybody's saying how bad 2020 was, and it's the whole Match commercial with 2020 being the devil and all that.
Yeah.
And it's like, it was, but there are bad parts to every single year. That one just happened to have more of us happen to have those at the same time.
Right.
So I don't know. I guess the reason why I want to talk about it is that's exactly what my grandmother would want. I posted this Mary Oliver poem on my Facebook about a conversation with a fox. And in my mind, my grandmother is the fox. And it talks about, how the fox says, "You fuss, we live." And that was very much her motto. Like, she just showed up. She just lived her life, showed up as exactly who she was, with no sorries, no apologies for really who she was. Some people that hurt their feelings, and other people it didn't. But I just, like, I want to really embrace everything that came out of 2020, even the hardships, even the hurt, simply because that's what we're here to do. So I just figured we could kind of talk about that piece a little bit.
Well, that reminds me of what Rob said when we had him on the podcast. He was like, you can talk about trying to find meaning in life, or you can just live life. And then the living is the meaning. Like we were having a conversation with him, and he called out that like none of us are sitting around thinking about the conversation. We're just having it. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from your grandmother as well. Like she would rather just have the conversation than ruminate about it and think about it and pontificate and all that stuff. And that that's like a direct path to presence. Is that how you experienced her? As like a grounding, just like someone who was present with you?
She was, I can't even say that she was present with me. I would describe her more as she was just present with herself.
Oh.
And I guess modeled it in a way where I just showed up the same way. I just matched it.
Present with yourself.
But she wasn't holding, it was kind of like she would just show up and say, this is how you do life. I'm not really going to teach you about it or tell you about it. I'm just going to do it. I don't even know if she had the capacity or the words to try to teach that to me. It's just how she lived. And so in turn, I just followed that. I don't know. That's a really good question.
Well, that's just
me.
Teaching by doing, right? Like that's what anytime we talk about parenting on this podcast, it all comes back to modeling.
Right.
Do you think she was aware that she was doing that, or was it not even anywhere in her consciousness? Like it wasn't even like I'm going to show you by doing. Do you think it was just like, this is just what I'm going to do, and that's
definitely not on her radar? Yeah. No, it's just who she was. I mean, she grew up born during the age of the Depression. There were 6 of them. Her dad was the school superintendent. Her mom was a homemaker. Her mom, my great grandmother, was a safe house for all the people coming through on the railroad searching for work and whatnot. If they needed a hot meal or a place to sleep, to this day, she doesn't know, but apparently my great grandmother, there's some sign that you put out so that the transients that were coming through would know and identify that it's a safe house. You could get a meal or whatever. She couldn't ever figure out what it was, but that was my great grandmother. And then, so she just grew up hard. Right. But a lot of fun as well. Like I hear stories about how they took the neighbor kid out and, a mile out of town when it started snowing, and they did this sledding type game, and they basically broke the kid's arm. Because they wanted to see how far he could fly off the sled when they hit this particular bump. So, I was like, that's awesome. So then basically, because there's 6 of the Clark kids, that was her and her siblings, put the kid on the sled, and then they carried the sled back to town a mile in the snow, like on a gurney or something, right? And dropped him off at the doctor's house, rang the doorbell, and ran away. It's like, these are such different times.
Oh my God, that is so badass.
And then she went to the big city of Lincoln in Nebraska and worked in the Russell Stover factory cannery as a chocolate sorter.
Oh, wow.
And married my grandfather, and he went off to the war, and she stayed and worked. And then when he came back from the war, they had a hard life of being farmers. Some years were great and some years were not. So she was a hard woman in many ways, simply just because, the life that she led and the time that she grew up in. And so I don't think she really had the presence of mind to be a teacher. I think she just, because times were so hard, sometimes she just showed up,
there wasn't really room for there was no philosophizing about what you're doing. It was just, you're doing it.
You're just doing it. Yeah. But in that doing, I learned a whole lot, because that's where I spent the majority of my childhood, was out on the farm with her. So yeah.
That's something interesting I hear from people in different generations, is there's like, I love talking to my mom about this stuff because she'll talk about her parents and her parents' parents and how you go back a few generations and people did things because they had to. Mm-hmm. And that kind of helped create the world that we live in, where there are a great number of us who don't have to do stuff. We just get to. Mm-hmm. And then the question is, what do you do with that? Mm-hmm. You know, what's your motivator when you don't have to work quite as hard to have food and provisions and clothing and money and all that stuff? Like, you know, and so we say things like your grandmother was hard. And the parallel there is that they may as well, they may just as easily call this generation soft.
Right.
You
Absolutely.
know? Mm-hmm. And so there's a part of me that thinks, oh, we should get back to that. We should get back to the people who were just doing the thing because it was there mm-hmm. to do. And, you know, didn't spend all this time in rumination and freaking out and having anxiety over stuff that wasn't here and now. But then there's a part of me that thinks that they were like that because that's what the world that they were born into necessitated. Mm-hmm. It's not necessitated now. Mm-hmm. So now it's like you only live that way if you want to, if you choose to, if you work to, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Which and then like grit goes out the window. I don't mm-hmm. think anybody has grit who doesn't need grit, but people who do. And mm-hmm. I actually, like, there was a time that I had more than I do now. And I spent the last couple of weeks realizing how little grit I actually have these days compared to other times in my life. And I built myself a little grit trainer. Like, at the end of the day, it's a little checklist and I'm looking at it constantly. It's right above my laptop and it has like, these are the things you say you want to do. Are you doing them, or are you going to change your mind and just admit that you don't really want to do them? You know, like kind of holding my own feet to the fire. Mm-hmm. But I have to hold my own feet to the fire because I don't have anything else to do that. You know?
So let me ask you this. How did you come to the checklist? Because, you know, we're talking about reflection, and to make that checklist, you kind of have to have an idea of where you are, because then the checklist is part of where you're going and who you want to be. So how did that come to be?
Oh, so around this time last year, I was, what's today? Today's the 13th. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a year ago today, I was 10 days from losing my job. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of started jumping into the True North thing pretty heavily, you know, like we were trying to get sponsors. And mm-hmm. I don't think I mentioned this on the podcast, but I made a newsletter just for the sponsors we were trying to get, to show them, like, here are our numbers are higher. What are your requirements for saying yes? And like every time I would try to get a sponsor, they would say no. And I would ask them what would make it yes. And then I would just update them every single week with all the things, all the metrics that they wanted. And it was all quippy and fun and cute and everything. And I was writing that and putting a lot of time into it. And, you know, I was managing to do all the things that I wanted to do and fill my life with all the things I wanted to fill with. And it was easy. And I had it all together. And then at some point throughout the year, I just slowly declined into this ball of stress that felt pulled in a million directions. And like, I had no time to myself. And I, you know, there were all these things I had to do and there wasn't enough time in the day to do them. And I was just so busy. I was busied. And, my ability to prioritize just went out the window. My motivation went out the window. I was burnt out on being burnt out. And sometimes the podcast was the only thing I could keep going. Like, the only things that I knew were going to happen for sure was that we were going to record on Thursday and we'd have our tribe call on Tuesday. And I just, you know, I just had a friend point that out. Just said, hey, earlier this year, you seemed so together. And now you seem so all over the place and not together at all. And everything's hard for you. And then you're having to make systems to make life easier for you. And the systems that you're making are so complicated that they're making life harder for you. You know? And I think that was like right around the time I was trying to blame ADHD for everything. And so just having them mention that, just draw the parallel, just make the observation. At this point in time, you were operating this way and it was with great ease and joy and fulfillment. And now you're not. And you're trying to, but the trying is taking more effort than the thing you're trying to do. And so then I, you know, went inside and figured out what that was about. And there's a part of me that just bullies me into doing stuff. I think when we first started recording, I talked about that directly. Like I just bully myself into I shame myself into doing it. And I developed this fear of what happens if I don't. And slowly but surely, if you think about all the little parts of myself, like a team in a corporate environment, everybody has their job. That guy's job was to motivate me. And the only tool he had was to bully me into doing it. It was to shame me and make me feel bad for not, you know? So all of my motivations to do all the things were just me beating myself up about it. And so then I, took that to therapy, and I was like, well, that's not the best way to be motivated to do a thing. So they've started to have this little job transition where we hired a new person to take over that role, and they're transitioning the other one out. And so they're right now we're like in the training period where the person moving out is training the new one. Okay. But the new one isn't the other one I called my drill sergeant, and the new one I'm calling my motivating friend.
Okay.
Because it's very much, it feels more of a feminine energy, and it's very much like, okay, you are where you are. There's no judgment in that. There's no shame in that. Where do you want to go? How can we help you get there? And if you aren't intrinsically motivated to get there, then let's own the fact that you don't really want to, and just cut it off. Stop trying. And it's really like a very brass tacks character, but also there's no bullying. It's just facts.
It sounds very kind.
It is. It's like
strong, but kind
but firm.
Yeah.
Like, I am not going to make you feel bad if you don't do the thing. But if you consistently don't do the thing, I'm going to ask you if we really if that's even something that should be on our plate, because obviously it's not important to you, and let's just own that.
Right.
And so this little grit trainer, it's just a little Excel spreadsheet I made. And ultimately what it is, it's not like a year ago, if I had made this, there would have been like a consequence for not getting everything checked every single day, or every single time I would go through it, and I would every time I wouldn't put a check where I wanted there to be a check, there would be a little judgment spike, like I have to do better tomorrow, or here are all the ways I failed today. But now it's kind of like a reminder to do the things that I tell myself are important to me. And then it's also a checklist to see if I did them. And it's also a little data gathering tool to see if something gets pushed off so many times, reevaluate if it even needs to be on the list, because obviously it's not really something that I value. I tell myself I value it, but I don't, because if I did, it'd be getting done.
Right. So it kind of makes you reprioritize. So it sounds like a habit tracker.
Yes.
In a way.
Habit tracker / habit builder.
Yeah. Right. Which is like anybody that's trying to start something new. I mean, research shows that a habit tracker will get you to your goal because you can tangibly see whether or not that you're making progress. But it's crazy because what I think you kind of what is that saying? Put the nail on the head. Put the head on the
hit the nail.
Hit the nail on the head.
It's not a good phrase. I don't like that saying.
It's not.
It's so easy to mess up, and it's not even that like
exactly.
Poetic.
And see, here I am.
I hit the nail on the head.
You hit the nail on the head because I think so often, like, that's one of those tools that is used that can better you, and it's supposed to be a positive thing. But when you let that ego mind get in the way, like, you totally use it the wrong way, which induces shame, and it induces, the bullying and the negative self-talk. And so what you're saying though is it was a matter of your friend pointing that out to you to make that perception shift that somebody else needed to be driving the car.
Yeah, she just observed. Like, hey, you were this way before. And then, like, in that conversation was like, hey, and years ago, you used to wake up at 5 a.m. to work out every single day. And now you complain if you're out of bed before 8. Like, there was a guy in there. There was a guy I knew who just, you could tell it was important to him because those were the things that were in his life. And he was happy about it and excited about it and just did it. And it was easy, more like your Grams.
Yeah.
And now there's a part of, and then what she was contrasting that against was who I had become, which was someone who spends just as much time moping about how he's not that guy anymore. You know?
Yeah, you're expending your energy somewhere
Yeah,
else.
or finding something to blame and then trying to develop some way of being that compensates for that. But if I have ADHD, I've always had ADHD, which means that when I was waking up at 5 a.m. to go work out, I had ADHD. It obviously wasn't getting in the way then.
Right.
And so there's like the only, and honestly, the other thing that really, really kind of like sealed the deal for me was, first, it was brought to my awareness that something had changed, because you shift so slowly, you don't even realize you've shifted.
Exactly.
You know? And so sometimes it takes someone to say, hey, you were there and now you're here. And then there was no judgment there from that friend either. It was just an observation.
It sounds like she or he is
it was a she.
Safe, like a psychologically safe.
Psychologically,
person.
Emotionally, yeah.
Yep, yeah, very safe person for you. So they met you where you are and you were able to see it.
Right. She's one of the few people that if she says something that would normally trigger me, I have like, I have safeguards in place to keep that from happening, which are just, I remind myself that this person has a track record of always being kind and having my best interests at heart. So it's like right at the get-go, if I felt myself getting defensive or something, it's like, wait, this is this person. This isn't just a person, you know?
Yeah, right.
But the second thing that it was, I was having a conversation with my wife about the COVID vaccines. And one of the big concerns is that it got developed so quickly. And a lot of people are like, I'm not going to take it because it was too fast. And so I've been, researching and being like, okay, why? I hate to use the word researching. I feel like it's a slap in the face to actual researchers. I was reading articles online of like why is it so fast? Like, why are people saying that? What makes it so fast? And I found a really good thing that breaks down. It doesn't take sides. It doesn't have opinions. And it goes into why this was so fast by contextualizing it within the idea of why do vaccines normally take so long? And basically it was like, here are all of the reasons that they take as long as they do in a normal setting. And then here are all the ways that those individual things are different for this. And so it wasn't trying to be persuasive. It was just giving you facts. But one of the things it said was that a big chunk of the time that it takes to develop a vaccine is all the bureaucratic red tape, the board meetings, the decisions, the committees, the people all getting together to decide things. It has nothing to do with the research or the science or the distribution. It's all like the decision makers trying to, try to handle it. And there was a sentence in that article that said, turns out these things can be sped up a lot simply by people just wanting them to. And that dug so deep, because then it was a couple of years ago, I decided I was going to go back to school and finish my degree. Okay. And I haven't. And if someone were to ask me why, I would give them excuses. And it got to the point where now I call myself out so much that if I see myself typing an excuse, I'll take it out and I'll put in brackets, I'll say insert excuses here, and then send it. Like, I included in the message. So it's like, oh, I didn't do it because insert excuses here. I've also started doing that with insert bullshit here. Like, and nobody has time for that, but I'm also like owning the fact that that's where I went, right? And the article really kind of hit me pretty hard, because then it was like, hey, it turns out it's really easy to go back and finish your degree simply by wanting to. And so if I haven't for a year, then the question isn't, well, I should just try harder, or I should judge myself for not having tried harder. It's like, well, maybe you just don't want to.
Right. Yeah.
So then if you don't want to, why are you telling yourself you do?
Did you come up with that answer?
Well, one thing that I've learned about myself is I very much like finishing a race, and I very much don't like running it. And so I am the personality type who will buy a book because I like the idea of having read it. And then a few pages in, I will stop reading it because it's too hard or too boring or whatever,
Yeah.
And so I like the idea of having the degree. I don't like the idea of getting the degree.
Sure. Yeah.
And I have been very good at finding all kinds of reasons why it's just too hard to go back to school. There's no time, or it'll mess up my life, or I can't do it remotely and I'll have to drive all the way back to Arlington, or fuck it. if someone wanted to, if someone offered me 10 grand to finish in a year, I'd finish in a year. And it's only 10 grand. That's not a lot of money.
Right.
And so I don't know. My answer was like, there are parts of the going back to school that I want, and there are parts that I don't. And the parts that I don't want have been louder than the parts that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And the parts that I don't want are also the parts where the growth happens. And I really am a big fan of growth. So
do you
it's
think
just fear.
Also that it could be just our conditioning? Like, do you think there's everybody else that's also telling a story to you about what it means if you don't finish your degree?
There's some of that. Like some of it, I think I was so close. I have like 9 hours left to make up. And this is a Bachelor of Fine Arts. So you have what's called a portfolio review.
Mm-hmm.
And you have two of them. The first one is to decide whether or not you can even continue in the program. And if you don't make it, then you can't continue to you can be a Bachelor of Arts, but not a Bachelor of Fine Arts. And then you do a second one later on. And I passed both of those with flying colors. And I'm so close. So there's a part of me that like, there's this sunk costs idea that like, if you don't finish it, then all that time you put in was a waste.
Okay. Yeah.
Which economically kind of makes sense.
Okay.
But there are already things I took from the schooling that I did that I still take. They happened and I took them on with the rest. I took them with me on the rest of my life, regardless of if I get a degree, Then there's the qualification thing. Like it's been really hard for me to get a job, and no one said this outright, but I think a lot of the no's that I've been getting have been from the fact that I don't have a degree. It doesn't matter that I've worked where I've worked.
But you're 9 hours short.
Who I've worked for. Yeah. And so like 9 hours isn't that hard. So, I mean, it could go back and forth, and a lot of those stories come from other people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not valid. I think there's a part of me that thinks the further I get in life, the more successful I get without a degree, the more fuel that gives to people who also struggle to get a degree and think that they can't get somewhere without it.
Right.
Like if I can do all these things and then say, by the way, I don't have a degree, then that gives hope and empowerment to the other kids who, like me, just for some reason had a really hard time getting one.
But at the same time, you don't, just like when you were using gratitude out of spite, it's like, don't not go back just to prove that you can still
and then
do something and have a job. Right. Exactly.
Because then a lot of the life lessons, like the life lessons I learned in college, are the things I took from it. Like I tell people, I learned a whole lot in art school, and some of it was even about art.
Right.
And but I also think that for me at this point in my life, for me to finish would be a little, just a little affirmation to me, for me, that I can do a thing. I can decide to do a thing and overcome the obstacles that I put there myself and get the thing done, which is an affirmation that I think is a healthy one for me to have and to pursue.
So your decision whether to finish this or not finish this, and whether or not you want it, actually needs to come from your body. This is a perfect example of using the body compass.
Yeah.
Because if you get into your body, and because that is the house of your soul, and you kind of put that question out there, is it in my highest good to finish the degree? Do I want to finish the degree? All of those questions, and then let your body answer, because it sounds like, just from sitting over here on the other side of the screen, you're spending a lot of time in your head about it. Right? Yeah. And you can convince yourself either way, based on the day, based on the mood, based on what somebody tells you.
Depending on how you spin it or whose story you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and this is exactly the very last thing that I posted to our Instagram was the quote. Notice when someone is in their head about something, trying to solve the problem, when really their heart has great clarity.
Yes.
And I think what this comes back to is like around this time of year, people are looking at fitness models and saying, I want to look like that. And then they go to work out and they say, I really don't want to do this. And I am 2 days into actually working out again. Like not just, I would go on a bike ride because it's low impact and it's easy on my joints, but then you can coast and you don't have to push yourself. So you can like get your heart rate up and spend an hour biking, but not really do anything. And I would do yoga, but I was really, like my body wants me to beat it up a little bit. I thrived in CrossFit. I really did. And so I'm sore. Do you know what my workouts are? The CrossFit gym that we used to go to, they post their workout every day. And I still get those emails even though I don't go anymore. I will take the warm up from the workout of the day. And then I will scale it down. Okay. And then I will cut it in half. And that is my workout. it's not anything. And I'm like winded afterwards and I'm sore. Walking hurts after doing it for 2 days.
But what's wrong with that? Well, you are meeting yourself exactly where you are.
Yes. And that's what I was getting to was like my body this morning, I checked in with my body and it was like, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for finally making me sweat a little bit and making me hurt a little bit, because my body knows that is what growth feels like. Right. And it's been craving that. It's been wanting that. And I've also been like just deciding to wake up early. Just wake up early and just be up. No, don't snooze. Don't go back to bed. Don't worry about if anybody else is up. Just wake up. Not even like to fill my time. Not even like, oh, that's the only time I can have to myself, so I have to wake up because that's my meditation time. No, just wake up and be up. Just be up. Whatever happens, happens. And so I'm kind of a little bit low energy and I'm a little bit groggy and it takes me a while. And my body is like, thank you. Thank you for doing that. And so it is physically, I am experiencing an abnormal amount of discomfort because the normal amount of discomfort for me is 0. And now I've got some discomfort, and my body, when I check in with it, the only thing I get back is gratitude. And so what it's doing is it's reminding me that like discomfort is uncomfortable, but it's not bad. It's not to be avoided. It's not to be, like that's what growth, it feels like. And so, I could tell you cognitively all the reasons why I haven't gone back to school yet, but insert excuses here. I know that the second I'm actually in a class, my body and my mind and my soul are going to be like, thank you. Yeah, you had to rearrange some stuff. You had to make some calls. You had to finagle. You had to, your life looks a little bit different now for the next 15 weeks. But thank you. And I had to go through working out and waking up early to kind of get that message.
To click, right.
Yeah.
So what you're saying then is you immediately just put that decision into your body just while talking. Like, already that your body's going to say thank you, that your body is saying, yes, it would be good for you to go back to school. Right.
And like it's been wanting me to go back to lifting. It's been like, am I like I would check in with my body and it's like, don't do yoga again today. Get the barbell out. Like, and I'd be like, no, yoga feels better. I'm going to do yoga. And then I would think, well, the garage is a mess. There's no room in here to work out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then I realized, and then later on I was like, well, we do have a driveway. That's not a mess. I could do it in the fucking backyard, and then I could actually drop the weights. And there are ways around it, but I was so stuck on this idea of doing it in the garage because that's where my excuse lives.
Yes.
And then my wife's like, hey, I want to park my car in the garage. Can you clean it out? I'm like, sure. And then I clean out the garage that day. And I'm like, well, shit, Ryan, you just really don't like yourself very much, do you?
So you can clean out the garage for
someone
else.
For someone to park their car, but then she parks the car in there. I'm like, well, there's still not room. Like
she's got her car parked.
Yes. And so then first time I actually did my lifting, it was in the driveway where it could have been all year.
But you made a movement. I love it. So the best advice Graham's ever gave me, it was when I was in college, and Oh gosh, back in my 20s, I definitely sat in everybody else's business. I was really good at mental suffering. And so I called her on a particularly bad day and just sort of this woe is me story to her, um, who even knows what it was about at this time? It doesn't even
Mhm.
really matter, but it was very self-deprecating conversation. And, you know, this is sort of her hardness coming through. And at the time, it really hurt my feelings that she wasn't placating me. I get it now, but at the time I was like, oh my gosh, that was so hurtful. But this is what she said to me. She didn't say a single word, like, I'm sorry, oh, you got this, let's figure this out. She literally said, well, get yourself up, kick yourself in the ass, and go get another beer. She said, it's like, okay, thanks. And now I absolutely love it because I feel like that's what you just did to your lizard. Like you kicked it in the ass. You're like, no, I'm done with this excuses. And then go get another beer is like, just go do it. Just go live. Like, stop worrying about all this other shit that seems to get in the way. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's just holding you back. And so now sometimes when I get in this place of excuses or self-pity or whatever, I'm like, just kick yourself in the ass, go get another beer.
Right. Yeah. And it's really, and that's a really, really, like, you have to have some type of self-love practice in order to do that to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise you're kicking yourself in the ass will instantly turn into my little drill sergeant person in my head,
Right.
being like,
Exactly.
you're wrong for doing XYZ. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like a good friend will also kick you in the ass, but
Mm-hmm.
you only accept it and take it healthily when you understand that they're doing it in love and motivated
Mm-hmm.
by your highest good.
Yeah,
And so for you to be able to kick your own self in the ass, that has to be built on a foundation of self-love
absolutely.
first.
Yeah.
And your grams loved you and you knew that,
Mm-hmm.
which is why it
Yes.
stuck. Because think of how many other people in your life, if they had said that, it would not have landed that way
Oh
ever. Not
no.
even not even in retrospect. Same
No.
words, you know?
Yep. You are exactly right. Yeah.
And so like this little grit trainer, it's the first item. Basically, like, it's every column. It's Sunday through Saturday has a column, and then the rows are, did you do anything in this arena at all today? And it's just a
Mm-hmm.
yes or no little check. But the top half is all self-love stuff, and
Mm.
it's first. And so like I'm treating that like it's as important as all the things I have to do,
Mm-hmm.
because if I don't treat it like a thing, first of all, it is a thing I have to do. And second of all, if I don't treat it that way, if I treat it like dessert or like an extra, or like if I have time, well then that's what really got me where I was self-love went out the window.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And when you don't have that, then you have a really low ceiling on your capacity to do all the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You told that story in our backup episode,
Which story?
the go get another beer.
I did?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
even remember that.
One of the reasons why I wanted to record the little 4-minute one was because I listened to our whole backup episode.
Mm.
Which I don't think people know this, but we do. We always have like a backup episode just on
Mm-hmm.
the back burner in case something happens where we can't record. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we needed another one because we talk about now, we talk about events, we talk about where we are in life. And if
Mm-hmm.
you do that, but you listen to something that's like a few months old, it can be really jarring because we are not any longer where we were when we recorded that.
Right.
And so it doesn't really fit. But in that episode, you did tell that same story. And I
Interesting.
remember listening to it, and in the wake of like the fact that I was even listening to it at all because of your grams, I was like, I don't know if I need to release Abby telling a story about her grams on this episode. But then I thought, oh, people need to hear that.
Hmm.
And then there it was.
There it was. I
And then
guess
there it
it's
was.
been on my mind a lot simply because I am really hurting from this, right?
Mm,
She was very ill, and only because, in all honesty, she didn't die of COVID. She didn't have COVID, but I think the circumstances around COVID led to her decline.
mm-hmm,
She lived in a facility where it was just assisted living. So she got to go to the dining hall every day and eat with her friends and talk to people. And she had visitors come all the time. And she got to go to the library and get, she was a ferocious reader and would read like a book a day. And all of a sudden, all of that stopped. And they weren't allowed to leave their rooms. And they couldn't go outside for fresh air. They got their meals delivered to their room, their meds delivered to their room. All their visitors couldn't come. So it's like she already struggled already, not being able to get out as much as she wanted. And then this happens and it feels like you're in jail and no way out. And so I really do feel like that led to her decline. And then she fell and broke her hip. And that's ultimately what she didn't recover from. But so my point is like her end of her life was thinking about death. She was really suffering when I went to say goodbye. And I wondered, as a soul, like, why can't you just choose to exit when things start to go bad? Like, I have some big questions for the universe when I get there, because I see her laying in this hospital bed, unable to move because they just basically screwed her hip back together and it hurts, and she's refusing to walk, and she's not eating, and she's not drinking, and anytime she does, she aspirates it. And I'm like, this is not a life, and I sat and I read to her and I had these conversations with her about that she gets to choose, right? She gets to choose when to go, and she gets to choose. And then she didn't. And I would get so mad, like, why don't you just go? Like, this is miserable. Because I didn't want her to suffer anymore, right? I'm sitting in her business. Like, stop suffering, please, already. But that's kind of a whole nother topic. So like like it was necessary. It was time for her to physically stop suffering. My hurt comes in because I lost a person, my person. And so I'm sitting in that loss pretty heavily, where she always saw me for exactly who I am. I mean, I said this to my brother. We are the only two people that I think she didn't try to change. She didn't care who we were or how we showed up. She just loved us no matter what. The day I told her I was gay, she didn't flinch at all. I mean, there was no questioning. It was like, great. All right. Let's go mow the cemetery. We used to take care of a cemetery. That's where that comes from. So that was random. Sorry.
I'm gay. Yes, we're gonna mow the cemetery. That is a proper response.
Great, let's go.
You hear that, all you parents? When your kids come out of the closet to you, that's the answer. Well, let's go mow grass on some dead people.
Oh, that's I've been thinking about it really. No, there was no questioning of my character. There was no judgment. It was just like, great, that's who you are. Great. I mean, maybe she even saw it coming, knew it already. She never told me that information, but she just didn't care. And so she loved me, I felt, unconditionally. So that's the loss I'm sitting in, because there are very few people, I feel like, in our lives that are able to fit in that category. When I kind of go through my relationships, most of them have conditions in some way, that I need to be this way or be this person or show up this way or not show up this way. And she wasn't. And so I'm in this really weird place of like, I'm sitting in that loss of losing one of my people. But at the same time, hearing her say, get yourself up, kick yourself in the ass, and go get another beer. Like, you fuss, stop fussing. We live. Like, I'm just hearing her like, great, now go be that person for somebody else. Go find that person in somebody else, just that it's a cycle. And so I'm like, God, even in her death, she's teaching me this lesson that maybe all along, that person, going back to your self-love conversation, is maybe that person needs to just be me. Maybe I need to be my own person.
Yes.
Because that's
Yes.
what she was for herself.
That's what attracted you to her.
Yes.
Was that she didn't need another okay, so what you're bringing me to is, like, when I lost my dad, I hated platitudes. Any platitude you gave me, I was like, unfriended you on Facebook by the time you finished saying it. Like, it was not those don't help.
Right.
And there are some phrases I've learned from losing my dad that can sound platitude-ish. And one of the things that I've learned was that all the things that I loved about my dad did not die when he died. And now whether or not he lives is a matter of choice and intentionality. So, like, the Rona happens and everyone's like, oh, I don't have my friends, but you find ways to connect if you just have to be more intentional, right?
Right. Yeah.
And in the same way, you're probably hearing your grams a whole lot more frequently now than you were when she was alive, because your body is being intentional about making sure that those things stay. And like, and it's crazy how that creeps up on you. Like, my mom and sister were watching The Mandalorian, and there's a character whose name is revealed, and it's an odd name, and they both looked at each other and they repeated it to each other the way he would have said it if he had been in the room. So they were quoting my dad, something he never said, but they both knew he would have said, because that's just something he would have latched onto and would have made it his word, and like inserted it into situations and said it a certain way. And then I go over there, and here's the creepy part, is they both said it that way. And I was like, oh, is that how dad says it? Whoa. Like, I didn't even realize it was so him, you know? And so you realize that, like, the only thing about them that dies is their body, which sounds really empty and hollow and platitude-y, you know? But I mean, at the same time, you have taken the parts of her that help make you whole. Yeah. And you're using them to make you whole. Exactly. Right. And, you know, we talk about reparenting. You were a kid, you had parents, and we all have stuff to heal from. All of us have stuff from our childhood to heal from. And your parents were busy healing themselves. So it's not really all entirely their fault that they weren't there to help you heal all the things as well. Right. And so then as an adult, you go back into that inner child who still lives there in you, and you be the parent for them that they needed at the time. And then that helps heal the wound, so that, you know, like, we've talked about that a lot. Right. But I'm learning that concept expands beyond parenting, because in our True North tribe, we have a widow. And over the years, I have watched this person first have a lot of fear around the half of their life that is now missing. And then now has moved into a place of being that person for themselves. Not fully, because there are some ways that you're only one person, and you're not wired the way that your partner is wired, which is why you find partnership, right? But in a lot of ways, the ways that they were angry that they had lost, they now became for themselves. And some of that is in keeping the other person alive, and some of it is in just filling the role and learning that you are really capable of giving yourself just about everything you need. And that then you look at relationships, and what do? You look to the other person to fulfill your needs. You look to the other person to tell you that you're valuable. You look to the other person to, you know, to their strengths can complement your weaknesses, right? But if you live there and stay there, then you're never going to have those strengths, you know? And so there's also this school of thought that's like, you get in a partnership with somebody so that they can show you, by modeling, how to fill in your own blanks, and how to, like, they love you, not as I'm like, you're always going to need me for this love, but as a way of modeling to you how to love yourself. So that then that relationship can bring both of you into your own wholeness, whereas, just like what you said, you are your own person, you become your own person. And it's crazy how you don't really give yourself the freedom to do that until they are gone. The phrase I was going to say was until they're out of your way, but that seems really dismissive, and like, but they do, they kind of like step aside. Like, I have shown you what it looks like to love you. I have shown you what it looks like for you to feel loved. I have shown you what that love feels like. And now the only option for you to feel that is to give it to yourself.
Right.
And you are more than capable.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's like, that's why in all the Kung Fu movies, the sensei dies right before the big match.
Right.
Because that's the only way that he'll actually win, is when he realizes that he has been his own sensei the whole time.
Right. And it's that what you're talking about is just coming back to that internal locus of control. You don't need that outside source. And that's, I mean, the greatest teachers teach us that you may have thought I've been teaching you all along, but literally you've been teaching yourself. And yes, I mean, I love it. They know the point when to leave so that you can own it. You can definitely own it. And I think going back to what you were saying about being in a relationship, I don't know, like if you don't do this for yourself, and I have been in these kinds of relationships, if you're constantly looking for that in your partner, that validation, that love of yourself, you're just going to be disappointed all the time. You're expecting an outcome from somebody else that you have no control over, that they have become your measuring stick. So that does not end well. Right. And
right.
So it's interesting because now I feel, like what she's given me is this ability to, like, I do know how to love myself. And so I'm going to do that. And then I think what that's going to do is open the door for other people to see, like, I will be able to love people better simply because I am just showing up for me,
Right.
and loving myself in that way.
And then you're modeling for other people. Like, that's the ripple effect, right? Is you model. We were talking about the ripple effect, how your childhood wounds from your parents, teachers, friends, whatever, they come from those people having their own childhood wounds, which come from the people who gave them their own childhood wounds. Like, there's this ripple effect, right? So like the thing that you're going to therapy for started 100 years ago from somebody else who was fighting a war or something, and it's still like, but in the same way, you can also have a different ripple effect where you do what your Grams did, where she was her own person. She was present with herself. She didn't need anybody to fill her own gaps. And you saw that and it was modeled for you. And then when you do that and you model it for other people, then you're giving them an invitation, whether they accept it or not, as their business, to do that for themselves. Because like you said, you're in a relationship and you count on the other person for validation. And then they have a really bad day at work, or they have a relative who dies, or something that causes them to go inward for a while. If you rely on them to tell you that you're important, they're not going to for a while. And then you're going to stop feeling important. And then you're going to make it their fault.
And then there's going to be resentment. And
in addition to all of the shit they're going through, you have now added to that pile of more shit that they have to go through.
Right.
And so how often does that happen? Whereas I think if you move into being wholeness for yourself and loving yourself really and truly, and trying to get to a place where you are your own validation, you are your own measuring stick, and you don't depend on the other person for love, support, encouragement, whatever. It's there, and it's always good when it happens and you welcome it, but you're not devoid of that thing without them providing it. Then you can choose not to be just another battle they have to fight, and maybe even help them and fight it with them.
Yeah. I had this crazy realization while I was here with my family. I learned a lot about my great-grandparents and a lot about Grams and her husband, my grandpa. And then I know, about my mom, it's her mother. I had this huge realization that I all of a sudden saw this. It was like this really out-of-body experience where I was looking down on all these generations, and time was not linear. It just was this big picture. I could see everything. And in the way that I saw it, I was this blimp that like came along and changed everything. Because what I learned over the last few days, and I've slowly been learning this over time, but for whatever reason, you go home for a funeral and everybody shares stories. They want to know stories. And so my great-grandparents were my mom's grandparents. So she, of course, knew a lot about them. She had them for a long time. Same with my uncle. And so I realized there's been this pattern of very hard, unloving, unaffectionate people. And all of a sudden, like this, I was wasn't sure if I was going to share this because I don't in any way want it to come across as arrogant, but I feel like I chose this particular family line to change this pattern. Like this, I do believe that you pick your parents, you pick your family, your lineage, your heritage based on the lessons that you are here to learn, because it is all their weaknesses. And so it's like we were driving out here to Denver and it dawned on me, like, if I pick out all the weaknesses going back several generations, holy shit, this is the stuff that we've been talking about, that I've been trying to fight, that I've been trying to change, and that I've already made a change with my son moving on into the next generation. And it's all has to do with loving yourself, meeting people where they are, being kind, being affectionate. And it's interesting, that, yeah, a lot of the crap we carry around could be 100 years old. But this is exactly what True North is really all about, is understanding that and saying, nope, it stops here. Like having the mindfulness, having the awareness to say, this is the lesson I'm trying to learn. It's hard. It sucks. I have to stand up for myself. And that's really hard for me to do. I have to speak my truth. It's very hard for me to do. But if I don't, then this same story is going to continue, the same line of thinking. And where is it going to get us? And in a weird way, I felt empowered when I came to this realization, like, the whole family dynamic rests on my shoulders. If I don't do this work, nothing will change and the world will end. It wasn't quite that dramatic, but I was just like, holy shit.
It's heavy. There's a lot of weight.
Yes. Well, it just made me realize, like, the purpose of my soul is, like, it's big. I got a big job. I have a really big job.
Yeah.
And then I went into this conversation in my head, like, well, who are you to think that you deserve to be that kind of change? And,
whose voice is that? Who
Figment,
put that there?
Figment, my lizard is going through that, but then also childhood trauma where, the voices of adults in my life that often told me I wasn't good enough. It was those conversations. But luckily, doing this work that we do, the things that we talk about, is I have the tools, I have the capacity to change those conversations and recognize that it's not me that's saying that.
Right.
So that I can keep going. But it's just, I don't know, out of her death, I just feel like I'm sad and there will be a period of grief, but I feel like I'm rising in a whole different way.
Right. Well, you get to choose what parts of Graham's didn't die.
Exactly. Right.
And what's funny is when you're saying that, I think a lot of people are in the same boat as you. And I say that because maybe this is a logical fallacy that a lot of people do, where, like, they think their experience is everybody's experience. But, like, we've talked on this podcast about how my dad was physically abusive, and then he stopped when I was 11, just stopped. He broke that cycle. And if you look at his parents, the guy that raised him was physically abusive and violent. And that's because he fought in a war. And so you look at him and say, okay, well, he did that. And there was no resources and there was no support in culture for men to, show that kind of vulnerability. So of course he just took it out on his kids. And of course they learned that that's what masculinity is. And of course they passed that down to us, and it all makes sense. Like, everybody was kind of just doing the best with what they had. Not that that's an excuse for it on an ethical sense, but it's not excusing or condoning, but it's understanding. Right. And so then, part of the story that I didn't tell is what made my dad's dad stop hitting them, which is a much more violent story. Then he went and left for 7 days. He came back, slept for 3 days, and then decided not to hit us anymore. But then you think, going forward, now I get to continue the breakage of the cycle by choosing to parent my son in a way, like, he's really the first generation of my line that will not know being physically abused at all.
Right.
But it's not just me, because my wife was also a child of abuse from her mother, who was abused by her mother. And so she's also like, it stops. It stopped with me a little bit, but it's stopping cold turkey with him. Right. And so there's this, like, if I expand it not only back in time, but outward in the family tree, it's like you can draw a line and everything above that line was abused, you know, and for reasons you can understand and give them all the grace and compassion. But everything below that line, all those kids are now like the first generation that's just not going to know what it feels like to be abused. And I can't help but to think that maybe that line goes beyond, you know, like how far does that line reach? How many people in this generation were abused by people who were abused by people who were abused by people, etc., and are now saying, stop.
No more. Yep.
I'm going to love myself the way I should have been loved from the beginning, and teach the next generation how to love themselves. Yep. It's kind of a cool thing to think of, that to imagine that you're a part of.
Exactly. That's why it felt so empowering.
And then you have to look at your kids and be like, okay, well, now we have to use that empowerment.
Yes.
Because at the same time, we were taught to be abusive. We were taught to be controlling. And how many of our desires for our kids really stem from our own insecurities, from our own childhood and the things that we were abused by?
Right.
You know? Yeah. So like, we still have to kind of take out that trash and do that work, because if we're not careful, all of the shit that we dealt with as kids, we are going to put on our own kids, and we're just teaching them we're just repeating the cycle again if we're not careful. Right. It's so easy. If you're not mindful, you're probably going to make them have the same childhood that you did. And if you want if you wish a better one for yourself, then you need to give it a better one to them. And that takes presence and intentionality, but you also have to love yourself. Yes, you do. Because at the end of the day, one day you're going to die. And then they're going to have to deal with the fact that they're the only person left who can love themselves. And did you teach them how to love themselves?
Exactly. And it's hard to teach that if you don't have it in yourself.
Yeah. And as long as you're depending on somebody else to love you, then you're not setting yourself up to learn how to love yourself.
Right. Exactly. And it does take practice. It's not easy. I can easily fall into patterns when I'm tired, when I'm exhausted, when I'm stressed out about something. Old patterns that I learned in my childhood. I can certainly become those people easily. But here's the beauty of kids too, and how resilient they are, is I get to come back and say, I'm sorry. I get to come back and repair. Because it isn't perfect. Practice isn't perfect. It's progress. I'm certainly making progress to change that and love myself. And that I think that's important to note too, though, that it is, you may not be perfect. It may not happen in every moment, but what you do with that, being able to circle back and have the conversation and say you're sorry, and talk to, for me, talk to my son and how I handled a certain situation. He's learning so much more from that than what actually happened.
Right.
Because, it has the higher vibration, the higher frequency, and it's still new enough where I can totally rewrite that, and not allow it to become a story in his mind that will then repeat the pattern. So anyway, this is all good stuff.
Man. Was this the reflection episode you were hoping for?
I don't know. Not really. Not really. But I mean, I didn't know where I would be. I didn't know where I would be today. And you can hear it in my voice. I still am really raw. And so I don't even think I'm just sort of going through time right now in La La Land. So I feel like that's where I've been today. Present, but sort of just not at the same time. Is that possible? That's how I feel.
Well, I mean, you are in a lot of different places right now, emotionally. And for me to if I were to do a check-in right now, I'd say that I spent this episode holding space for you to be all over the place and nowhere at once, which then actionably turns into me coaching myself to say, okay, Ryan, you may have to carry this episode, which is fine because I can carry an episode. But then we also talked about it being the reflection episode, which is a very you-led thing because I don't like we haven't talked about what that is.
I
It's
know.
more me sitting there going, okay, go, um, so kind of like those have been kind of like where I've been for the last
Mm-hmm.
hour. Maybe let's try this. Let's just try to do the reflection episode every single time until we actually do the reflection episode, even if it takes until January 2022.
Well, here's what. So I think I've chosen my word of the year. I think because I feel like January is actually going to start next week when I'm back home. Things have happened, but I mean, it's perfectly appropriate. I think I've chosen the word release. And I've just come to this, like getting caught up, like, oh, we've got to talk about reflection January 1. Like before that's when you do it. You have to reflect on your year because January 1 starts and you're already off into the new year. And I've just decided I'm just going to let go of all of these expectations. And if we end up talking about reflection on February 1 and we talk reflecting on 2020, it is what it is. And I'm just, that's been the whole point of this podcast in the first place, is just to show up how we are, to show up raw, to just show up. Nothing's scripted. And it's like, why do we have to play these rules that reflection has to happen
on January 1st?
Yeah, exactly.
Like who decided that it's not even a solstice? It's just some random day that we decided is the new.
Yeah. And it is a fresh start, so to speak. It is a new year, but you can make that at any time. You can make that at any time. So I'm just going with the fact that I'm letting go the expectation that it has to be at a certain time. And I do want to talk about reflection because I think it's a very crucial part to the growth process. And so we'll get there eventually.
Well, I mean,
today was not it.
No, we are always talking about reflection in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's true.
And you right now are in the process of doing the reflecting still. So maybe it's one of those things where you can have to move through that chapter before you can look back and talk about it.
Yeah. And I think that's what I'm trying to point out is we all have things. And for me, my thing has been the last 3 or 4 weeks has truly been about coming to terms with saying goodbye to Grams. That is what's taking up space in my heart and my mind. And I don't have the capacity to figure out what my word of the year is right now or reflect right now. But I'm okay with that because it will come. And it's almost like sometimes things are more important than being on someone else's timeline, right? I am my own measuring stick. So anyway.
Oh,
there it is.
I love everything you just said.
Well, good.
I had more words, but I always have words. That doesn't mean that everyone needs to hear them. What are you grateful for?
I am grateful that I said yes. And I don't think it was really me. It was Abby's soul saying yes. What I mean by that is, we had a trip planned out to Colorado this next weekend for the holiday weekend, spend some time with my sister up in the mountains. I try to get here during the winter as well as the summer. As we've talked about before, the mountains are really, they refill my cup. I get a lot of power and a lot of energy from being in the mountains. And so that was already planned for next weekend. And then of course, Grams passed, and that timeline's totally out of your control. And so what that originally was going to look like is we come do this trip to Nebraska, be with my family, come back to Texas for a day or two, and then fly back to Colorado. And it just, like the dynamics of it just seemed ridiculous. But in my mind, it's like, that's just what we needed to do, and my wife was like, no, I think we just need to call it what it is, scratch it, take the week and just stay in Colorado, and just have the time to rest and go inward. And at first I was just like, oh my gosh, it's another week away from school and it's a week away from work. And it's just, I was coming up with all those excuses. And finally I was just like, fuck it, kick yourself in the ass, get a beer and stay the week in Colorado. And so I'm glad I said yes. I'm grateful I said yes because I felt myself breathe for the first time in a long time. Now that we're out here in Denver, I'm not quite in the mountains yet, where it's like we're closer. I can see them. The range is right there. And then tomorrow we're going into them. And it's just like, I feel myself finally, okay, we're coming back to center. We're coming back inward. So I'm grateful that that part of me, that self-love, self-care inside of me said, no, Abby, you need this, just go. So what are you grateful for?
I am, oh man, I remember how you were grateful for your babysitter so many times that it felt silly to be grateful for your babysitter.
Yes.
That friend that I was telling you about, who called me out in love for having gotten from where I had been to where I had gotten. There's a really weird way to say that. I'm grateful for this person.
Yeah.
I'm like unbelievably grateful. Like, I think I've talked about before how we have this hashtag called UCG, which is like ugly cry gratitude. But I really am. It's, I don't even know if we have time to get into it, but I have very few voices in my life that I trust that much. And that trust is there because it's been built. And it's been built because I've listened to what that voice says and have been consistently shown that there is wisdom and insight and love. And it's kind of like you with Grams. When you think about who she is to you, you realize how little you have that, how few people match that description, you know?
Right.
Yeah, I am unbelievably grateful for some of the people I have in my life, particularly this one. I don't know if she even listens, but yeah. Add that to the list in my little spreadsheet for the 2021 gratitudes. Ryan is still grateful for all
I
of
love
the friends.
it.
And I'm not naming this friend because then all my other friends who do listen
I know,
are gonna
right?
be like, why did you grateful for me? So I'll just let every single person who's listening who knows me think that I'm talking about them because I probably am.
It's you. Yeah, I'm talking to you.
I'm thankful for you, listener friend. You have my back. Thanks.
Exactly.
Anyway, when you do go snowboarding, my favorite slopes that I need you to do you board or do you ski?
I board.
Okay, you're my people then. So I need you to go down Spitfire. And there's another one called, it's not really a slope. It's like a little double black that cuts between two slopes, but it's called the Devil's Crotch.
Awesome.
And there's this really nice tree run on Spitfire with these switchbacks. It's super fun and it's terrifying.
Great.
Okay, everybody. Well, until next time, thank you for loving me. Thank you for putting up with our Zoom audio.
Yes.
Thank you for being there.
Bye.
We are grateful for you. Thank you for listening. And if you like what we're doing and you want more, then you can join our tribe to interact with other like-minded individuals. You can go through our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/True North Podcast 11.
Is it Podcast 11 or is it True North 11?
Oh, shit.
It's in our show notes. If you want more than that, you want some more hands-on healing stuff that we do, I do actual energy healing and body work, and Abby does life coaching and workshops. And you can find the URLs in our show notes when we figure out what they are.
And we are always trying to increase our reach and bring more people to find their true north. So we would really appreciate it if you could leave a review and rate it in whatever podcast platform you use.
Done. That's perfect.
What about the gratitude?
Oh, this one. Hang on. And then And one last thing. What are you grateful for? There. I said it. I said the thing.